Frankly, I love it. But if you allow me to wallow in that, we won't get anything else done. I'm going to try to limit this to a time frame. That's all. So I got to forego the non-humility, if that's the right word. There's one thing I've got to say that's extremely important. Just that we understand each other. I cannot tell you who this man was, and neither can anyone else. Science is never going to be able to say that we can prove the name of the man that was once upon a time wrapped in the Shroud of Turin. Simply because science, by the very nature of the thing, is forced to deal only with facts. You can't make wild guesses. At least you're not supposed to. Everybody does, and you only get excited when someone else does. But no matter how long you talk, and my record is somewhere between 6.5 and 7 consecutive hours. And I don't think I repeated myself once in that length of time. I'm not going to do it tonight, obviously. But you can talk that long about the cloth, the information coded into it, the man that really was once upon a time wrapped in it. But if you're going to be honest, and that is the name of the game, sooner or later you have to say that nowhere in the cloth is there a name. Nowhere does it say this is a photograph of. I can't tell you who he was. There's no way that we can ever tell you that this or any other portrait is that of Jesus of Nazareth, simply because we do not know what Jesus looked like. We don't have his fingerprints, we don't have his blood type, we don't have his dental structure. We don't even have a good description of him. Painting and sculpture were forbidden to the Jews. It was against their religion. And for some reason that nobody really understands, none of Jesus' 4 biographers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, bothered to tell us what he looked like. All we know about Jesus from the Bible is that he was young. He was between 30 and 35, and he must have been built like a bull. He was a carpenter in the days before there were lumber yards. If Jesus wanted a board, he had to cut the tree down. If they had a little money in those days, they'd have a donkey to drag it into town. We can show even historically that Jesus was among the extreme poor. The best that he could ever have hoped to have done would be to cut that tree down to a size he could handle, put it across his shoulders, and carry it. He had to have been built like the lumberjack that he really was. But that's really all we know about him. So once again, there's no way that I can ever tell you that this was Jesus of Nazareth. But you should also know that the vast majority of court cases are not won on direct evidence. It's very seldom that anyone might come forward and say, he committed the murder. I watched him do it. I only know of one murder that was ever committed on television, although I did watch that one. But this is why we have police departments, detectives, to put a case together and pile up circumstantial evidence piece by piece by piece until the weight of that evidence is so great that it's impossible not to render a verdict. And that's what we're doing. If nothing more, the Shroud of Turin Research Project has become the biggest piece of scientific detective work that the world has ever seen. And tonight, here, you're the judge and you're the jury. And I'm not being cute. It's only a statement of fact. The only promise I'll make you this evening is that I'll tell you the truth. We'll give you facts and data, a little bit of what we've accumulated, and you do anything you want to do with it. Truthfully, I couldn't care less. They tell me that that's a horrible way to start a talk, but I've started a great many that way, because it's truth. I know what I believe today, but I really can't make anyone else agree with me. All I can do is what I did. Give you the information, a bit of what we've got, and then you decide, if you think you can, who was he? What if anything does he mean to you? The Shroud of Turin is a piece of linen cloth. It's 14 feet long, 3 feet 7 inches wide, and obviously carries on its surface the image of a crucified man. Without question, it's the most controversial thing that the Roman Catholic Church ever got their hands on. They never actually owned it until last October. The cloth has been privately owned since the 1400s by the House of Savoy. The ranking member in Savoy was Umberto, King of Italy, deposed, living in exile in Lisbon, Portugal. When he flew out of Torino one step ahead of death in the late 40s, he left the cloth behind in his private chapel. That chapel today is the Cathedral of Turin. It came under the protectorship of the Archbishop, and that's where the name came from. Turin was the ancestral home of the Savoys for centuries. Umberto died about 1.5 years ago. Instead of giving the cloth to his daughter, as his ancestors had done, he willed it to the church. They finally got legal possession of it last October. But they never did make up their mind if this is really the cloth that Jesus was wrapped in for burial or not. They've actually fought wars over it. It wasn't until 1968 that Pope Paul authorized formation of a team of scientists, international in scope, to examine it and try to determine once and for all, genuine or bogus. The first time they ever gave a so-called relic to science. Some of us think that it's rather strange that no one ever called this team together. To the best of my knowledge, not one man or woman on it today was ever appointed to it. And yet today, for without question the first time in history, every discipline of science is involved to the utmost of expertise and technology, equipment and brains, on a non-military project. You couldn't stop this if you wanted to. Someone at the Air Force Academy has said that we used to think that the strangest thing in the universe were the black holes of space. Today we know it's a 14-foot-long cloth over the altar in Turin. But that's your decision. The cloth turned up in 1352 in a two-bit little village in central France called Lirey, L-I-R-E-Y. I find I have to spell things occasionally. You might have guessed by now I'm a New Englander. Someday the rest of you people are going to learn to talk English like us. And obviously the first question to be answered when the team did come into existence was if this thing really is the burial shroud of Jesus, what was it doing in France? Where was it for 13 centuries? The tracing was volunteered by a couple of men in England, Dr. John A.T. Robinson, Bishop of Woolwich, Anglican Church, Dean of Trinity College, Cambridge, and a historian from Oxford named Ian Wilson. They volunteered to try to trace this using art and literature. It was Ian who discovered that every one of the masters, you name him, Michelangelo, Botticelli, Da Vinci, whoever, used that face for his model of Christ. That's why you think you recognize him. You've seen that face 1,000 times. One man has made Jesus an Italian, someone else a Frenchman, a Dutchman, a Greek, a woman. They've romanticized him. They've done everything imaginable to him. I think virtually everyone knows what Picasso did. But they've copied details which couldn't have been taken from anything in the world but this cloth. The conformity is true all the way back to the year 500. Prior to the year 500, there isn't any. And it makes sense. Once again, one painter gave Jesus the face of a 12-year-old kid. Someone else gave him a beard the color of mine. I've already said your guess is just as good as mine is what Jesus actually looked like. And yet, for some reason, it appears that the entire church, east and west, by the year 500 had reached the conclusion that this was the true likeness of Christ. Ian turned up a letter written by a Greek bishop, a man who lived and wrote around the year 300, 325, Eusebius of Caesarea, a prolific writer. He did a lot. But no church, no denomination has ever considered his work inspired. That is to say that nobody has ever thought that it was worthy of being in the Bible. But he does give us a tremendous picture of what life was like in the early church. Customs, traditions, stories, legends, that sort of thing. And that's where the poor devil got into trouble every time. Like me, he was a storyteller. Like me, they've called him a lot of names. They've said you couldn't believe a word he said. It was sci-fi. It was too far out. Who could ever believe Eusebius?